There are some Star Wars what ifs that would change a single duel, a single battle, or a single decision. And then there are some what ifs, like this one, which quietly remove one meeting that is so important that the entire saga has to reorganize itself around its absence. Welcome back to my What If series. Today we're going to look at what would happen if Qui-Gon Jinn never went to Tatooine. Because if Qui-Gon Jinn never goes, that means he never finds Anakin Skywalker, and that means that one of the most central relationships in the entire Star Wars saga never begins. The Jedi don't discover Anakin in Mos Espa. The Council never debates whether he is too old to train. Obi-Wan never becomes his master. Padme never meets the gifted child who will later become the man that she falls in love with. Luke and Leia aren't born. Everything goes just in completely different directions. And of course, Palpatine, perhaps most importantly of all, doesn't gain early access to the most important person in the entire galaxy. Official Star Wars sources frame Anakin as the potential chosen one meant to bring balance to the Force, but The Phantom Menace makes it quite clear that Qui-Gon and Obi only reach Tatooine because Amidala's damaged ship needs parts that are there. So at first glance, it sounds like this should break the whole story beyond repair, because if the Chosen One is never found, then surely the prophecy simply fails. It falls apart before it ever really begins. But the reason that this what if is so interesting is because Star Wars doesn't treat destiny as this little fragile thing that can permanently be derailed by one missed turn somewhere. If Anakin really is the one through whom the long arc of the Sith will finally end, then Qui-Gon Jinn missing him on Tatooine can't be the end of the story. It simply means the story has to adapt and maybe become darker, rougher, and a lot more tragic before the Force finds its way back to him. And I think that this is a version of the story that is really interesting to kind of go into and think what might happen. Because without Qui-Gon, Anakin still rises, but he rises without hope, without guidance, and without anyone ever teaching him that that power that he has inside of him is something sacred rather than something isolating. He's still extraordinary, still dangerous, still central to the fate of the galaxy, but instead of growing up inside of the Jedi Order, he grows up inside slavery, crime, and of course abandonment. And by the time the Jedi finally cross his path, they're no longer meeting a child that they can shape into something. They're meeting a wounded adult who's already decided the galaxy only changes when someone strong enough is willing to force it. So this version of the story that I'm about to lay out to you is not about whether Anakin matters. He still does. We're going by the idea that he is the chosen one. It's about what kind of chosen one the galaxy is going to get when the Jedi miss him the first time round. Also, I want to highlight that this idea came from this lovely comment that I got on my community tab, so thank you so much for commenting. And also, if you aren't subscribed yet and aren't commenting on these, why not? You should totally subscribe and join the crew. So, if Qui-Gon never goes to Tatooine, I think the immediate events of The Phantom Menace mostly continue without just Anakin at the center. Naboo is still invaded, Palpatine still uses the crisis to advance his political power, and Darth Maul still emerges as living proof that the Sith have in fact returned. Yes, there are a few things that we have to rejig here a little bit based on the fact that Anakin, accidentally joins the fight and blows up various things, but I think the story will find its way through those. Tatooine, meanwhile, remains exactly what Star Wars sources have always said it was, a lawless, outer rim world dominated by Hutt control, smugglers, slavelers, and opportunists, with places like Mos Espa and Mos Eisley functioning as hubs for trade, racing, crime, and survival rather than justice. And that really matters, because without Qui-Gon Jinn's interventions, Anakin's early life doesn't become a story about rescue. It becomes a story most likely about containment. He's still a slave, still brilliant as a mechanic, and impossibly gifted as a pilot in ways that no ordinary child should be, but now nobody arrives to tell him what these strange instincts mean anything beyond usefulness. Watto sees profit, of course, pod race crowds see entertainment, other mechanics see talent, and Shmi, of course, sees goodness. But nobody sees prophecy or sees the Force, and no one gives Anakin any language for why he feels as though he was made for something larger than the small, brutal life he now even more so probably feels trapped inside of. And I think that that will change him profoundly, because canon Anakin at least gets to imagine that there is a world beyond Tatooine where his gifts mean hope. This version of Anakin gets no such reassurance. He just grows older in a world where power belongs to the cruel and where law means almost nothing and gifted people are exploited rather than understood. Tatooine in Star Wars is not merely poor or distant, it's structurally abandoned, and that makes it the perfect place for someone like Anakin to begin forming the belief that institutions, maybe like the Jedi, don't protect the weak. They simply fail to reach them. So while the Republic weakens, while the Senate corrodes, and while Palpatine begins arranging the future of the galaxy from Coruscant, Anakin's life is moving in the opposite direction. He's not ascending into the light, and he's being buried deeper instead into a world that teaches him the same lesson every day. If you want to change something, no one is coming to do it for you. And so we have to start looking at how this changes everything in Anakin's life. And of course, one of the biggest changes will be how Shmi dies. And I think that this is the biggest change from canon, and it's the one that could alternate this entire storyline. In the original story, Shmi survives Anakin's departure from Tatooine. She even tells him it's okay, she pushes him to do it, and she's eventually freed by Cliegg Glass and then later dies after being abducted by Tusken Raiders, a death official Star Wars material explicitly frames as a critical step on Anakin's path towards the dark side, not the final catalyst, but definitely a critical step. But in this version, I think her death probably comes earlier, before Anakin even leaves the planet, because otherwise there's no really emotionally satisfying reason for him to break out of the life he's known other than, I don't want to be a slave anymore. So I personally would play it this way. Anakin reaches his mid-teens on Tatooine, having become exactly what the world there will reward: a brilliant mechanic, impossible pilot, and someone already starting to attract the dangerous attention in Mos Espa through his racing and repair work. Official Star Wars sources describe Mos Espa as like a major pod racing center and trade city, which I think creates a very believable space in which Anakin's skills would keep making him visible to all the wrong people. He's beginning to imagine escaping. Perhaps he's starting to form plans, perhaps even meeting off-world smugglers or pirates who might someday provide a way out. But before he can act, Shmi is taken, or she's killed in violence that grows out of the world they live in, most plausibly probably through Tusken Raiders' brutality, because that already has such deep roots in Anakin's canon tragedy. The exact shape of how this happens can vary, but the important part is that Anakin tries to save her and he fails, and in this kind of version of the story he tries to save her more actively than he would in canon, because he's there and he's seeing it happen. And so this failure becomes his first great emotional break. Because in the canon story, Shmi's death is horrifying, but it lands inside a life where Anakin already has other identities to hold on to. He's a Jedi, Padawan, warrior, he's in love with someone, and he's a hero. But in this version, he has none of that. If Shmi dies before he ever leaves Tatooine, then the lesson Anakin takes away from this situation is not simply that death is cruel, it's that the universe allows the innocent to suffer while everyone with the power to intervene remains far away, distracted, or indifferent to what's going on. The Republic doesn't matter here, the Jedi don't matter here, the Force, whatever that may be to him, doesn't matter here. The only thing that mattered was that his mother was vulnerable and no one came to help her, and he himself didn't have the strength to do it. So he leaves Tatooine, not because he has been a chosen one, but because staying would mean accepting a world that has already taken the only person who made being there bearable. And that gives his departure a very different emotional charge from canon. It's not hopeful, it's angry. And there is that same sense of guilt, but it's different now because she's already died, and it's raw. He's not stepping into destiny, but he's running away from the proof that compassion without power is meaningless. And so we have to look at where Anakin goes. And I think the most satisfying place to send him is Florrum, because it lets the story stay grounded in canon while also giving him exactly the kind of morally grey environment that would shape this alternate version of him. Florrum is described as a pirate heaven associated, of course, with Hondo Ohnaka and his gang, removed enough from the Republic's control so that criminals, deals, savages, and opportunists can all survive there, while the Clone Wars repeatedly bring the Jedi into contact with the world, and we need that. And that is why Florum works so beautifully to this story, because if Tatooine taught Anakin that the galaxy abandons the weak, then Florum teaches him how those abandoned survive. He doesn't become a Jedi, but instead he becomes useful. He probably fixes ships, modifies engines, flies dangerous routes, and learns who can be trusted and who absolutely can't. And so he slowly becomes the kind of young man who can move through pirate networks, black markets, salvage circles, and outer rim criminal economies without fully belonging to a single one of them. He's not comfortable there necessarily, but he is legible in a way that he would never have been in the Senate or the Temple. People on Florum don't ask whether he is too old, too attached, or too unstable for anything. They ask, can you fly it? Can you repair it? Are you good? And that's about it. And I think that's its own kind of schooling, but in some ways it's the worst possible one for someone with Anakin's gifts. Anakin at this point is learning self-reliance, but without wisdom, power without discipline, loyalty without morality, and anger without any real framework what to do with that. He also is still absurdly force-sensitive, of course, throughout all of this, but because no one has named that truth for him, it manifests not as like a spiritual identity, but as instinct taken to levels that the people around him can't. He can read danger before it fully arrives. He can fly as though he already knows where a ship is meant to go. He can repair things, of course, almost intuitively, and he survives encounters that maybe he shouldn't survive. And all of that would only add to this half mythic reputation that he starts to build up amongst the pirates and the smugglers. By the time the Clone Wars begin, I think Anakin would definitely be a rumor in certain Outer Rim circles, a young pilot with impossible reflexes and a mechanic who can bring dying ships back to life, and someone who doesn't seem quite bound by ordinary luck. Not a Jedi, not a Sith, but an anomaly. And that is a very compelling version of Anakin, I think, because instead of entering adulthood inside an institution that is there to support him, even if it fails sometimes, he enters as a self-made weapon, basically, formed in places the Republic barely sees. But of course, for this to work and for Anakin still to remain the chosen one that eventually topples the Sith, we have to find a way to reconnect his story to that of the larger Star Wars saga and the Jedi. And I think the best way to do it is not through prophecy first, but through reputation that we've just established. By the time the Clone Wars are underway, Jedi operations are reaching deeper into unstable Outer Rim territory, and the Jedi's repeated interactions with Hondo Onako's circle make Florum exactly the kind of place where Obi-Wan could plausibly encounter someone like Anakin. Hondo and his pirates cross paths with Jedi multiple times in the canon story, which gives us a very nice natural bridge between the underworld and the Order. So rather than Obi-Wan setting out to find the Chosen One, I think he would stumble into a mission involving pirates, separatist adjacent cargo, hostages, maybe stolen military assets, and he starts hearing whispers of this impossible pilot or mechanic who seems to know too much and survive way too easily. And so when he finally meets Anakin, the key is that he doesn't meet a boy who can still be folded neatly into the Jedi vision of what he might become. He meets a hardened young man who is definitely angry, brilliant, emotionally guarded, and already far too powerful for someone who's never been trained by the Jedi. And this would be, I think, a really fascinating version of their relationship, because Canon Obi meets Anakin as a child and slowly becomes his teacher, and I think very much a brother figure to him, and maybe a failed guardian. But here he meets him almost as an adult, and the first feeling definitely wouldn't be parental responsibility, but alarm. The force around Anakin is so strong, raw, and instinctive, and there's no temple discipline holding it in place. First, Obi might not realize what he's found, at least not in the full prophetic sense. What he would notice immediately is that this person moves through danger with a kind of impossible fluency, and he would also notice the emotional instability underneath all of that. Not merely anger, but old anger, the kind that manifests, and he's had years to harden into its worldview. And that's when the tragedy might become clearer, because the Jedi at this point didn't just miss a gifted child, but they missed him specifically at the right time and allowed the galaxy itself to educate him instead of them. I also think that this version of Obi would be really, really interesting. I don't want to say more interesting, but would be interesting, because he would be trying trying to reach Anakin without the authority of having raised him. He can't just say, trust me, I trained you, I know you, trust me, I know what's best for you. He has to meet him where he actually is, a man who owes the Jedi absolutely nothing and has every reason to view them as just another distant order claiming moral authority over a suffering galaxy that they never meaningfully changed. And because Obi-Wan is Obi-Wan, he's obviously still going to try. Additionally, something we do have to think about here as well is that Qui-Gon Jinn would most likely still die, right, in this timeline. He's still going to die during the Phantom Menace, which means that during this time, Obi might already have another apprentice, so he might not even be able to take Anakin on at all. Maybe he can, maybe he can't, maybe it's someone else. Who do you think it would be if it wasn't Obi-Wan in this alternate version of the story? Who do you think would naturally hence become Anakin's master if the Jedi were to take him in? All this to say, we also somehow have to replace Padme in all of this, because most likely these two are not going to become lovers at any point of the story, which of course completely removes the entire original trilogy, but also removes the final kind of catalyst that pushes Anakin towards the dark side, the fear of losing Padme in childbirth. We need to replace it with something. I think the cleanest answer to this question is probably that by the time Obi meets Anakin and the Jedi enters his life, he's already formed some sort of second attachment on Florum. It doesn't have to be a romance. It can be a personal, small found family. It can be people he feels responsible for. And I think that that fits him quite nicely. Anakin's entire emotional life is organized around the impulse to protect at this point based on the trauma he went through with Shmi. And once someone has survived slavery, loss, and underworld violence, I think it makes perfect sense that he would fiercely attach himself to whatever fragile bond feels like home. On Florum, that could be a younger crew member, a fellow mechanic, a small surrogate family within a pirate-adjacent circle, or someone who reminds him of what it felt like to be powerless on Tatooine. So then the second wound happens. During a Jedi mission tied to pirates, the separatists, or a hostage exchange gone wrong, someone Anakin is trying to protect dies because the Jedi in this situation choose restraint, principle, or the larger strategic picture over the immediate act of saving that one person. And that's really important. We have to have the Jedi taking on this mindset as the catalyst for the death of this person. The Jedi wouldn't be wrong in some cartoonish sense here, but they would maybe making the kind of morally difficult decision they always tend to make, preserving more lives, maintaining discipline, and avoiding becoming executioners, refusing to act out of rage, but I think at times through that, losing sense of emotions and sensibility and how someone might feel in this situation. And hence, from Anakin's point of view, that would maybe be final confirmation of everything his life has taught him. First, his mother died because no one came. Now someone else dies because the people who did come still wouldn't do what he considers as necessary. And I think that that's the moment his grief might become philosophy. And if that is the case, Anakin actually never gets adopted by the Jedi, right? He doesn't get trained up. So it's something to think about when this would happen. Would this happen right when Obi meets him? Would it happen after Obi has taken him in, trained him up quite a bit, and then during one of their missions, Anakin maybe is reunited with someone that matters a lot to him, and then we get a whole arc around what happens here? I think to me, that personally makes the most sense because we do need an Anakin who's trained up from a Force perspective a little bit. And so Anakin starts to believe that the Jedi are not evil, but they're weak in a maybe more fatal way. They're compassionate, but compassion without Force saves no one. They are wise, but wisdom that arrives after the innocent are dead to him feels worthless. And they are moral, but morality that refuses to get its hands dirty simply leaves the cruel unchallenged until it's too late. And that is a really strong alternate version of Anakin's darkness, because he's now not falling out of fear that someone he loves might die in the future. He's falling because the universe keeps proving to him that systems built on peace, law, and restraint will hence always let the vulnerable suffer while the powerful keep moving on. Now, where does Palpatine sit in all of this? So Obi has met Anakin, he takes him on, the trauma hasn't happened yet, it's something that's going to happen, and so he's being trained up for a short while. And voila, Palpatine enters the picture. Now, this is where it becomes quite dangerous because Palpatine in this version, Again, he also doesn't get the luxury of shaping Anakin from childhood, but that doesn't mean that he loses interest in him at all. If anything, once Anakin finally enters the wider galactic picture, Palpatine would recognize immediately that this is a different but equally useful version of the same figure. Anakin is still immensely powerful in the Force, still very much emotionally driven and marked by grief and attachment, but just the form of his vulnerability has changed. In canon, Palpatine gets to present himself as an understanding elder, the private ally, maybe almost like a father figure, the one person who's validating Anakin's ambition and pain inside a Jedi system that keeps mistrusting him. Here, Palpatine has to do something a little more sophisticated. He has to validate Anakin's critique of the galaxy itself, and he doesn't tempt him primarily with the power to save Padme from death, because Padme's not here. He tempts him with the idea that Anakin has been right all along. He can say, in effect, your mother died because no one acted. These people died because the Jedi chose rules over results. The Republic protects procedure while we, the weak, are fed into war, slavery, and criminal economies. If you want that to change, then you need more than compassion. You need power strong enough to make evil afraid. And the reason that I think that pitch will work so well is that it wouldn't feel like flattery to this Anakin. It would just feel like recognition, finally. That is what makes this version so compelling to me, because Palpatine would not be seducing a lonely Jedi Knight away from his order. He would be offering philosophical completion to a man whose life already pointed towards that conclusion, that mercy without force is a lie. The dark side becomes attractive not because it promises private salvation for Anakin, but it promises effectiveness, and in some ways that is a lot more dangerous, because a person who falls for love might still be called back by love. A person who falls because he believes just the entire moral structure of the galaxy is too weak to save anyone is a lot harder to reach and bring back, because he doesn't feel corrupted. He just feels justified in what he's been thinking all along. And so now that we've set all of this in place, how do we bring Anakin back? How do we make sure he's still the one who eventually destroys the Sith? If this what if is going to honor the idea that he's the chosen one, he eventually has to confront the last representatives of the Sith Order in some form and become the person through whom that line is initially broken. I think the beauty of this version is that it lets him do that without probably ever literally becoming Darth Vader. Instead, Anakin becomes close to something almost more frightening, most likely a rogue Force wielder with enough grief, rage, and absolute raw power to believe he should decide the fate of the galaxy himself. He's no Jedi. He's not yet Sith, but he is close enough to the dark side that everyone around him can feel how catastrophic it would be if Palpatine succeeded in turning him fully. Obi-Wan sees it, the Jedi see it, Palpatine sees it most clearly of all, and yet this is where his life outside of the Jedi Order may actually become the thing that saves him, because this Anakin has spent his whole life being owned, used, manipulated, or abandoned by structures that claim legitimacy. Watto owns him, Tatooine traps him, pirate systems exploit him, the Republic ignores worlds like his, and the Jedi arrive too late and then still expect moral authority. If Palpatine finally reveals himself and offers Anakin the Sith solution, hierarchy, domination, control, the right of power to impose order through fear, Anakin may be tempted by the power, but I think he would also recognize the structure. Anakin would see perhaps more clearly in this version that the Sith aren't freedom, they're just an older version of the same disease that has ruled his whole life, the belief that the powerful have the right to own the fate of everyone else. And I think that is how he finally breaks from them. Not because he's going to become a perfect Jedi and not because he's suddenly serene, but because he finally understands that everything he hates, slavery, exploitation, corruption, domination, cruelty, masquerading as necessity, reaches its purest form in the Sith. Palpatine is not the answer to the galaxy's failure. He is its final expression, and he's using it. So when Anakin destroys him, he's still fulfilling the deeper shape of the prophecy, but the meaning of that fulfillment changes. In canon, Anakin ends the Sith after years as Vader in a final act tied to love for his son and the discovery of the man that he once was. In this version, I think he might end the Sith by refusing to become the galaxy's next master. He rejects not only the Jedi's failures, but the Sith's answers to those failures. He doesn't save the galaxy because he finally believes in one institution over the other. He saves it because he realizes the entire logic of ownership and domination has to end somewhere, and lucky for us, he's powerful enough to end it. And that makes him a very different chosen one from the one we know, but maybe an equally mythic one. Of course, there's another version of this where he does fall to the dark side and eventually is pulled back, maybe again by old ties on Florum rather than through his children. But I think it's quite fun to sit in this world for a minute where actually he manages to do all of this before he even fully turns to the dark side. And so the entire world of Star Wars changes after that. And so I don't think the question is anymore, will Anakin become the Darth Vader we know? It's whether this wounded but self-made, immensely powerful man will decide that the only way to save anyone is to become strong enough to rule through fear. And so maybe that's what makes this version of the story so tragic and compelling, because instead of the chosen one being found and then lost, he's missed, hardened by the worst parts of the galaxy, and only then forced to decide what kind of power he is going to become himself. But what do you think? Do you think that I completely missed the mark on this? Do you have your own ideas about what would happen if they never went to Tatooine? Do you think the prophecy is a lot larger than this and there's someone else who would have potentially taken his place, almost a nod to how in Harry Potter we have the idea of it could have been Harry, but it also could have been someone else? What do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Again, thank you so much to this lovely comment that got me thinking about this. I thoroughly enjoyed having a think about what would happen and tying it to events we see in the Clone Wars series and stuff like that, bringing Hondo into it and all of that. But really keen to hear what you think as well. Please do subscribe, please like, please comment down below what your thoughts are on this, and I'll see you in the next one.